Hey, my name is Mark Pew, and I am pleased to have on the upload a friend and mentor and really someone who walks the talk, Dr. Stephen Grinstead. I've gotten to know him over the past several years. In fact, I actually spent some time with him out in Camarillo at a functional restoration chronic pain program back in 2017. But he's been on the front lines of treating chronic pain and a variety of other issues that people have since 1984. But I can't introduce him any better than he can himself. So Steve, really welcome to the upload, and please introduce everybody to yourself and kind of the path that you've laid so far.
Thank you, Mark. And again, it's really awesome to catch up with you like this. With everything going on with the pandemic, I've gotten very good at video conferencing with people, and it's been a great godsend. You know, my story is similar to a lot of the patients I've worked with over the years. Back in 1981, I made a decision to let go of alcohol and pain pills as my best friend. And then I'm really glad I did, because I really built a solid foundation. And then in 1982, adversity hit. I had an accident, an injury, and ended up paralyzed from the waist down for a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks. And that almost led me to that long-term solution to short-term problems some people call suicide. And thanks to divine intervention and some really good support people and mentors in my life, I got hooked up with an awesome trauma therapist. Because my story goes way back to when I was 12 years old in 1962, when I was injured playing sandlot football with my cousins and neighbors, and got rushed to the emergency room in Pueblo, Colorado, St. Mary Corwin Hospital. Now, the emergency room there knew the Grinstead boys. I'm the oldest of 9 boys. So one or the other of us was always there. So rushed in, they injected me with something. Looking back with 20/20 hindsight, it was probably Demerol. And I felt better almost immediately. And then they sent me home with a prescription bottle, Tylenol codeine 3. And again, I'm the oldest of 9 boys, grew up in an alcoholic family system, parental maternal sides, generations back, all my cousins, aunts, and uncles, everything socialized around alcohol. And here at age 12, when I took that first prescription pain med, instead of having to be the super responsible family hero, I could chill out. And it really set something up with me. And then as time went on, I was very proactive in sports and everything, and doing all kinds of crazy, dangerous things like a lot of adolescents do. And so I kept finding opportunities to go doctor shopping. And then one day I was reading the label and it says, do not use alcohol with this medication. But then there was some fine print under it. And for most people, when they see that combination of the warning and the fine print, they will never take alcohol with it. But when I saw that fine print, which said alcohol may intensify the effect, it was like game on. And that led me into a lot of things. Then I joined the Marine Corps, got really, I was in special forces there and did a lot of crazy active things and some more trauma. I had childhood trauma, now I had Marine Corps trauma. So in 1982 with that injury, all that trauma flared up and I was hopeless, helpless in what I call a chronic pain trance, and saw no way out. And I got hooked up with a really great trauma therapist. She hooked me up finally after interviewing 5 or 6 different orthopedic surgeons. I found one who was willing to listen to me, not suggest surgery, not suggest pain pills. But at that time in 1982, a holistic approach was unheard of. But he helped set me up with some great resources with acupuncture, chiropractic, hydrotherapy, Rolfing, and physical therapy. And it was amazing. So I started learning recovery-friendly ways to live with chronic pain and stay in the recovery process. And then got into the field in '84 with the National Council on Alcoholism, going out to be a youth educator all the way from kindergarten through college. And then in 1986, a dear friend of mine who was also in recovery about the same time I was, he was one of the co-medical directors at a hospital addiction treatment program in Campbell, California, which was right outside San Jose. And he hired me to be the chief therapist for a brand new pain track they put in. because their premise, their philosophy was someone with chronic pain who gets hooked on prescription meds should be treated at the same time in the same place. And they hired me to do the job. And I don't know about you, Mark, but have you ever been thrown into a job and told do it, but not told how?
Oh yeah.
That was me. That was me. So I really made a lot of mistakes, and I looked at them as learning opportunities instead of beating myself up. And I had to move through a lot of the mistaken beliefs, the skewed perceptions, the cognitive distortions, and really start practicing what I learned from my mentor, Terry Gorski, who is one of the leading experts in relapse prevention and has been for decades. And I became certified in advanced relapse prevention therapy in 1991. And then he charged me in the mid-90s to start helping reduce the episode of long-term recovery people relapsing over pain issues, pain management. So I developed what I call the addiction-free pain management system. And I asked Terry, well, how am I going to do that? And he says, well, first of all, you need to go do some extensive research on what happens to people with chronic pain and addiction when they go to get help. And it wasn't like it is today. The internet was real primitive. There was no Google. There was none of these fancy search engines. You go to the libraries, the college libraries. Unfortunately, I was teaching at 4 different universities in the Bay Area: Santa Clara University, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz, and Stanford Medical School. So I had access to all those libraries. I got to be really good friends with all the head librarians and always brought them treats and stuff. But after 4 or 5 weeks, Mark, I was frustrated because none of my searches came back with anything. I could come back with reams of data on what happens for people with addiction and another set of horrifying reams of data about somebody who had chronic pain, but nothing with the two. So I called Gorski and I was whining and complaining. He says, well, what do I do next? And he says, Steve, that's obvious. Well, it wasn't obvious to me. He says, you go out and do your own research. So I did. So in 1996, I started going out to all the different pain providers, addiction treatment programs, both medical and social model, started interviewing, working with patients, collecting data, and started looking at some of the trends and themes and what led people into the problem. And more importantly, the people that were successful, how did they do it? So that led me to developing my first publication, which was a relapse prevention workbook on addiction-free pain management. Then I published the professional guide, which got later replaced with my doctoral dissertation, which is managing pain and coexisting addiction, but I changed that into managing pain and coexisting disorders. So all the way around, I was having to do a lot of research, seeing what other people were doing, trying to come up with best practice standards. And the other thing that happened in '96, Terry finally allowed me to go solo out on the conference circuit for Gorski Synapse. And in 2006, I became the clinical director. But between 1996 and 2016, I trained over 40,000 healthcare providers in relapse and pain management. So I've had a lot of success in teaching people how to help people, which is my mission statement. And then the program we started in 2015 and it closed October 2018, that was the culmination of all my professional years. And the outcomes were phenomenal, amazing. And that's why when they closed the program, I went into a different pit. A chronic pain trance, no, but a deep, dark depression, yes. And fortunately, my wife and I had already made arrangements for our 30th wedding anniversary to spend 2 weeks in Hawaii. And so when we were on that trip, it was a really good time for me to go through a grieving process, let go of what could have been, and look at what is. And then I started looking back, because the last thing I'd done before the program closed, 5 weeks of intensive remodeling the curriculum, the clinical curriculum. And I was looking through the titles of all the weeks. And it all of a sudden I noticed this is a table of contents for a book. So I started writing. So in 2018, I spent at least 3 hours a day at the Camarillo Library with my dog Becca. We would go and I would spend there writing, researching, pulling it all together. And I ended up having 13 different working titles for the book. But then right before it was time to finalize and send it to the publisher, it dawned on me the title that it came up with was Thank You Adversity for Yet Another Test. And it's a body, mind, spirit approach for relieving chronic pain suffering. And it became so obvious that that's what it needed to be. So in my dedication, I thanked both Sensei Richard Kim, who taught me that philosophy, a Zen Buddhist philosophy of adversity has two brushstrokes. One is crisis, the other is opportunity. So I could look at this shutdown as a crisis and wallow in the despair and depression, or I can turn it into an opportunity to get my message out to a wider population, which is what I did. And so, I started doing it. And then the amazing thing, Mark, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine. My publication date was November 10th, which just happens to be the Marine Corps birthday. So that was such an awesome thing for me. It was like the synchronicity kept building and building, and it was just amazing. And then, finally leaving California in January to come up here to Idaho, I was just positioning. I had already got a list of all the different mental health, addiction, pain management people in my area, was set up to start a chronic pain support group that I was doing pro bono for the local YMCA when all of a sudden COVID hit. So, it's amazing though that when doors close, windows open, and a number of places have asked me to do some online CEUs for people now that can't go out and get their continuing education. And so I've been working on a lot of those type of presentations. And then the one you and I are doing in June for the international community, that is going to be awesome too. So that's kind of like a little bit of background on who I am and where I'm at. And the other thing I want everybody to hear is I actually have to practice what I teach.
Well, that was more than just a little of background, and it's amazing your adversity that you have overcome really since you were a young adolescent. I gotta imagine, and I've had the opportunity to meet with you. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to meet a variety of other clinicians around the country, and a large number of them seem to have their own personal stories. And I think those personal stories oftentimes imbue them with more empathy because they kind of can see themselves, and I think their patients can see themselves in their clinician. Can you briefly kind of explain how, when you're engaging one-on-one or maybe in a group, how your life story, and you may not necessarily be able to go into everything that you've relayed here, but how your life story helps you connect with someone who is walking a similar path?
Okay, well, first of all, one of my other things I also do is train addiction counselors and mental health professionals. And one of the first things I teach them is the appropriate use of self-disclosure. So self-disclosure can be an asset or a liability. My personal experience could be an asset for some, but if it's used wrong or delivered wrong, it can be problematic. So for me, what I do is I want to listen first. I'm not going to share anything about me until I listen to them and really hear where are they coming from? What is their story? Because I want to work with people, not on people. So once I get their story, then I can weave in story and metaphors throughout the process to help create real intense rapport and trust a lot quicker. So a lot of people, though, when they try to do this, they try to share, well, the way I did it is the only way. So I've got to really watch that too, because what worked for me might not work for the patients I work with. So I've got to be real careful about what stories I choose and what metaphors I use when I'm working with people.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And empathy, I think, is more about listening than talking. Sympathy sometimes can be somewhat condescending and be more about talking than listening. So.
Absolutely. And most of these pain patients have had sympathy up to here, because that comes across, they're broken, they're flawed, they're defective, you poor thing. They don't want to hear that. They've heard it enough.
Yep, absolutely.
Empathy, though, wow, I can't even imagine what that would be like for you. I think if I was in your position, I would probably have engaged in a lot of the same things you have, which is a good bonding for some of the people I work with. So it's a non-judgmental, compassionate, and empathetic response is, I think, what really builds trust and rapport.
Yeah, and you can't really help anybody without that bond of trust, for sure, because there will always be something that they're thinking is going to happen. Well, getting to your book, and I've got it here, and it's a wonderful book, and it's a unique title because most people don't thank adversity. They run away from adversity or blame adversity. But one of the things that you put in there was something that I had run across that you had written previously and had used in many of my presentations. It's called BPTFUAR. And I'll just read it, and I'd love for you to kind of explain it a little bit, and then we're going to go into kind of a breakdown. But beliefs and perceptions cause thoughts, thoughts cause feelings, thoughts plus feelings cause urges, urges plus decisions cause actions, and actions cause social reactions. So it starts with beliefs and ends up with how what you do impacts others and vice versa. So can you explain how that BT, and it's very chronological in the way you wrote it, and it's somewhat arithmetic, you know, as you're going through it. So can it kind of explain how that process works?
Yeah, so one of the things when I do this with patients, I've got to keep it very simple and help, you know, present it in a way they can understand. So I'm going to share with them, up on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, if I'm one-on-one, I will draw a line down the middle of the page, and in one column over here is going to say problem, and the other column is going to say solution. And so on problem area, let's first of all, you know, you said a lot of people are upset with you, hurt, you're ashamed and guilty because of what you put your family through. So let's go back. We'll get to that in a little bit. But what do you think were the mistaken beliefs you learned probably from childhood that led to skewed perceptions about yourself, other people in the world, that led you to have these thoughts that came into your head? And here I would tell them, don't judge yourselves for the thoughts that come into your head. The human brain probably has thousands of thoughts going through it each day, but we focus on a finite number. The ones we focus on are the ones that end up creating our destiny. And then I remind them of a Zen parable Sensei Ken taught us. He says, let your thoughts flow in through the front door. Let your thoughts flow out through the back door, but don't serve them tea. So don't entertain the problematic thoughts. So those beliefs and perceptions can lead to self-defeating, self-destructive, or problematic negative thinking patterns. When we have those thoughts along with what we believe and perceive, it's going to generate in the brain an emotional response, which turns into a feeling response. So the emotion part is a biochemical reaction, and the feeling is the psychological interpretation the brain makes about those. And so we have thoughts and feelings. And those thoughts and feelings drive us, a survival drive almost at times, that we've got to do something about it, that urge, that impulse. And usually we go from having the thought to the behavior and wondering why people are mad at us again, because we don't see the intermediate steps, and we do not see the point between the urge and the behavior that's called the decision point. So one of the first tools I teach people with this is decision point management, which is very simply a 5-step process in order to do this BPTFUAR process. The process starts with, when you're in this cycle, your stress levels are going to go up, and you're going to be going into the amygdala limbic part of the brain, and you're losing your frontal lobes. You're losing your lobes, dude. So the first thing you need to do is, the first step is pause. Take a time out. Put yourself in time out. The second step is relax. While you're in that time out, you need to practice relaxation response skills that I'm going to teach you to bring your stress levels back into the safe zone, the green zone, the functional zone, so that you can go to the next step, which is to reflect. So pause, relax, reflect. The reflect step is about, how did I get myself here again? And more importantly, what is the next right step to moving out of the problem into the solution? And I don't want to do that alone. I want to do that with people support, my accountability partners, and praying for divine support. And once I've done that reflection and got feedback from others, I need to make a decision. So the fourth step is decide. Decide what to do. And a lot of people do these first four steps really well, but I've known a lot of people, and I can be one of them, that sometimes tend to procrastinate. So the last step is easy does it, but do it. So pause, relax, reflect, decide, and do. So once I teach them that, then okay, let's look back to a real situation that caused some painful reality, a negative social reaction, and let's go back and see what the beliefs and perceptions were, what the negative thinking were. Let's come up with at least 3 negative soundbite thoughts that were going on when you were in that situation. What were at least 3 uncomfortable emotions? I teach people not to judge emotions as good as bad or bad, they're comfortable or uncomfortable, and how those thoughts and emotions led you, what were some of the various impulses? Like one was to use more pain meds, another was to isolate, another was to lash out. So look at all those self-defeating urges. What did you actually do? In a lot of cases, probably 90% of the time, what they had an urge to do is what they actually did. And then we take a look at how did the result of your behavior impact you negatively and impact people you care about negatively. So after explaining this problem solution process to people, I next explain that there's no right or wrong way to do it. We could either go all the way down the problem side, identify beliefs, perceptions, thoughts, feelings, urges, actions, reactions, and social reactions, or we can take a look at the beliefs and perceptions and look at how we can challenge those that were mistaken beliefs and skewed perceptions. Then we could step down. What were 3 self-defeating or negative sound bites that were going off in your head? Let's list at least 3. And these cannot be censored or modified or edited. They've got to be how do you really talk to yourself in your head? And when you're in these situations, your brain works in sound bites, not long, elaborate sentences. So I want to capture those sound bites, 3 negative sound bites. Then if you want to do problem solution, so now we're going to look at each of those and challenge each one of those. Next, we drop down and pick as you were going through this situation that ended up badly, what were 3 of the uncomfortable emotions you were experiencing? And I teach people not to judge feelings as good or bad, they're comfortable or uncomfortable. And what were some ways that in the past that you've had these kind of feelings and you manage them in healthy ways? And for a lot of the people I work with, that has never happened. They've never had a healthy way of managing their feelings. So we take a look at what have you seen other people do that were managing their emotions in a healthy way. Then we teach some simple to learn emotional management tools. Then we step down to the next part where the thoughts and feelings lead to urges or impulse. So this is where we teach impulse control. This is where that 5-step process starts that I talked about earlier. The pause, relax, reflect, and decide go in the space between the urge and the action. And once people go through those 4 steps, then at the A stage, the action stage, what is the next healthy recovery-prone action that you can implement instead? And then in the social area, who are 3 appropriate accountability partners and how can they help you move out of the problem into the solution? And that's how simple. I use the KISS principle. Keep it simple and short. And less is more. That's another Zen concept I teach patients. Don't overanalyze this. Analysis paralysis, Too many people overanalyze something. So I want to teach them how to keep it simple, problem solution. And it's amazing that when you simplify things for people, the light bulb moments you get to see on their faces. And that is such a reward when they finally get it for themselves. Because I don't have anybody's answer, but I'm a pretty damn good coach and guide to help people finding their answers. And so if they're willing to do the work, I promise them that this will lead you to making friends with your pain, making peace with your pain, seeing pain as an ally instead of an adversary. And I promise you, if you're willing to do the work, you never have to suffer with your pain again. And so that process is an integral part. Cognitive behavioral restructuring is my free frame of it. but I do more than just the cognitive behavioral therapy. I use dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness, anything that works for the individual. So I want to find what works for them.
Gotcha. That's great. We've got about 5 minutes left, and so I wanted to talk in terms of in your book, you talk about ways that people sabotage themselves and saboteur patterns. And I wanted to read off the ones that you've got, but I wanted to highlight one, if you could, in the short time we've got left. So some of the saboteurs is avoidance by pretending not to know, avoidance by saying nothing, avoidance by distraction, avoidance by uproar, meaning everything goes chaos, total denial, minimizing, blaming, rationalizing, comparison, manipulating, recovery by fear or fear of change, compliance, having a flight into health or suddenly cured, diagnosing myself as beyond help, and the democratic disease state, the right to be this way. I imagine that people who are watching this could probably identify at least one of those things that they tend to self-saboteur, and not related to chronic pain, just living life and making decisions and being a part of a family and having a job and all that kind of stuff. And you talked about negative thinking. Well, you talked more about positive thinking than negative thinking, but negative thinking definitely is a death spiral, sometimes literally. But I wanted to focus kind of on comparison, because that one, there's so many people that are looking at others, and you can always find somebody that's better off than you. You can always find somebody that's not as well off as you. And so, you can find good comparisons and bad comparisons. But I think when you're trying to sabotage, I'm interested in how comparing sabotages progress.
Okay, so there's a number of ways this plays out. One of the big things I've discovered is when you mix pain patients with a traditional straight addiction population, they use the compare that I'm not as bad as them because I don't stick needles in my arm, I haven't lost everything, I have a legitimate medical condition and I'm being given my medication by a licensed physician. So I'm better than them. Now that's the inner saboteur at work trying to create differences, and that leads to some of the other denial patterns. Is that means mine isn't that bad, the minimizing one. That leads to I have the right to be this way because I'm better than. So the compare, it could be compare and despair, though, is the other side of that denial pattern. Comparing myself as less than other people. Oh yeah, I've seen other people be successful in treatment, but I don't have the support they do. I don't have the financial resources they do. I don't have the energy they do. So they can compare either way, and that can sabotage their treatment outcomes.
Gotcha. Well, there's a biblical phrase about do not think too highly of yourself. But the opposite can be true, is that you may think you're better than others, but that compared to despair, you actually make matters worse by poor comparisons like that. And I'm sure, in an intermingled program that has a variety of different people with different reasons how they got there, you could certainly see that mixture. So how do you manage that? How do you help people not compare? Because I think that's almost a native human organic kind of behavior.
Well, we teach them how to do it in a healthy way. So first of all, we need to educate people that if you spot it, you got it. That can go both ways. If you spot something you don't like in somebody, that's because you have that potential in you. If you spot something you admire in people, that means you have that potential in you. So we want to normalize and de-pathologize all of these denial patterns, not just this one, but all of them. That all of these patterns developed at some point in our life when they helped us survive some pretty horrible stuff. They were defense mechanisms. I call it my suit of armor. I armored up because of childhood trauma, adverse childhood events, and then Marine Corp trauma. I used all 12 of these patterns, and some of them play really well together to reinforce that armor. And it made me mistakenly feel safe, but it really kept me trapped and unable to really connect with other people. So we need to normalize and de-pathologize these patterns with people. And we cannot tell people they're in denial. That's a no-win position, because if they are, they can't see it. And if they're not, they can't prove it. So we need to tell them there was a time when these patterns helped you, but now, dude, they're hurting you.
Yeah, and I think the analogy of the suit of armor makes a lot of sense because it is there primarily for protection. But if you're inside of it and you're claustrophobic, chances are really good it's not going to end up well.
And you can't go heart to heart with somebody with all that armor in between.
Absolutely. I think that's something that people can visualize. Do you use that terminology with people? Do you see sometimes that light bulb going on and seeing both the positive and the negative of it?
Yeah, when I do the normalizing, de-pathologizing denial, I have a slide deck that goes with it, including a brief life story for me. Starting at age 5, I started putting on suits of armor. Started with leather, went to chainmail, then I went up to a higher grade of armor, got in the Marine Corp and put on the titanium suit of armor. And how over the years in my spiritual warrior journey, I had to learn to live life without armor. But just like on the Iron Man movies, Iron Man, Tony Stark, he had these electrodes in to where when he was out and didn't have his armor on, he could call it to him and he would armor up. Well, unfortunately, I have that button in here. When my brain perceives danger, which might not be danger at all of a sudden, I'm armored up. Mm-hmm. And I want to use those kind of metaphors and teaching tools to help normalize. And so people come up with some amazing metaphors of their own when I give them permission to do that.
And I think that goes back to that whole KISS principle, right? Because you're yes. dealing with people that it's very personal to them, obviously, but they may not be highly educated. I'm sure you've dealt with people that just got their GEDs, and then you're dealing with people that have PhDs and all sorts of other letters after their name. And really the common denominator is they made some bad choices, some bad decisions, and they've ended up in needful for treatment. So, you know, I think the simpler you can keep it, the more accessible it is for everybody.
You know, the hardest population to keep it simple, though, are the doctors, attorneys, high profile people. They try to complicate the simple process. They have a harder time of learning this, keeping it simple principle than somebody that has no education at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a great pleasure to chat with you. I know people who are going to watch this are going to watch it over and over and over again because it's almost like a Monty Python movie. You don't catch everything the first time you watch it, and it's going to take 3 or 4 times to bring it all together. Any final parting words of wisdom for folks that may be watching this that you want to leave them with?
Yes, I would encourage you to please, if you want some more free resources, if you go to my website, drgrinstead.com, drstevegrinstead.com, excuse me. You will go to the articles page and you will see my most current articles that on chronic pain management. Go to the video blog, chronic pain page, and then down at the bottom of those pages, you'll see the archives. These are free resources, a lot of education. You can just scroll through and find the one that resonates with you. And then there's my contact page. You can email me or call me and ask questions, and I'll be more than happy to support you moving out of the problem into the solution.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the thousands of people that you have helped, including myself, in trying to understand how best to manage chronic pain. I wish you great continued success and living life in Idaho. You know, I've seen the picture of your waterfall out back there. It looks like an awesome place to just kind of chill.
And that's where I'm going right now to have my lunch.
Hey, that works. Great. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.